Are you? Okay, we'll just put continue.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another presentations of the Dearborn Heights Libraries. This program will be I Chose Not to Serve, Germfask's World War II Public Service Camp, with your lecturer, Jane Kopecky. Jane is the author of World War II Conscientious Objectors, Germfask, Michigan, the Alcatraz Camp. This book has won the UP Notable Book Award as well as the Michigan State Historical Society Book Award of 2020. So take it away, Jane.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to, let's see, I will be going to share screen soon. But anyway, yes, I'm a native of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I grew up not too far from Germfask. And I was fortunate enough to discover a piece of history that hadn't been recorded. And it was about World War II conscientious objectors. And I researched for almost 3.5 decades before I completed the book. So in the 1979, I was finishing up my master's degree at Northern Michigan University, and I had completed all my classes. I needed 4 more credit hours, and so my advisor said, choose something you like. And so I said, I love history, and I know my area really well, so we decided on an oral history project. So I went around the community with my tape recorder and recorded hours and hours of people. But there was one thing that I really wanted to find out about. When I was a very young girl, just barely able to remember, World War II was on, and we lived in a farmhouse about 12 miles south of Germfask. And my sister and I were playing on our front steps. And my mom came out and she said, come in right now. And there were 3 men had emerged from a hardwood not too far from our house. And this was unusual. Strangers were not common. Family, neighbors, but strangers, especially 3 men. So my mom was quite concerned. And so she brought us into the house, and we were standing in the kitchen window looking out. I was standing in a chair in the kitchen window looking out, and these men approached right close to our front door. And there was a rock pile there, a farm field. Rocks had been thrown there over the years. And they had a gunny sack, and they would pick up a stone and they would look at it, and then they would put it in the gunny sack or back into the rock pile. And this continued on for some time. And my mom, of course, was frightened, and she wanted, we had no locks on the door. The nearest neighbor was a half-mile away. And so we were at their mercy. Eventually, neighbors drove down our side road, and my mom went out and flagged him down. And he went over to the men and said something in a gruff voice, and they picked up the gunny sack and they left. When my dad came home that night and we told him what had happened, he was really angry. And my dad was not one to become very angry. He said, those Germfask men, what are they doing roaming around the country like this? If I had a gun, I would shoot them. So this was a traumatic event that I remembered. So when I was doing this oral history project, I kept asking people, who were the Germfask men? And oddly enough, most people, no one had ever spoken directly to them. So in my interviews, these are some of the comments that I got. Conscientious objectors? Oh, you mean the draft dodgers? We called them conchies. Now, prior to the Vietnam era, conscientious objectors, that term wasn't used frequently. And of course, during World War II, who would be a conscientious objector? This boggled my mind to think that someone would object to World War II. I talked to another neighbor, and she said they were cowards. They said they didn't believe in killing, but do you think anyone who fought in that war liked killing? They had a job to do, but they were too scared to do it. And another one said some were communist. And another one, rich families paid off government officials to keep their sons out of the war. We're so far in the boonies, no one would know. And another one, our families worked hard for their money, but the draft dodgers refused to work and they lived the life of luxury. Another one, the Mennonite church brought them here. And another one said they gang raped a girl in Newberry and got away with it. And another one said the work foreman carried a gun. The only way he could get them to work because he threatened to shoot them. So every time I talk to these neighbors and people in the community, I always said, did you have any contact with these people? And they all said, no, but we heard this. And so now my curiosity is really perked. I wanted to know what was happening. So I talked, one of them said, talk to Bruce Hendridge. He's a Mennonite minister in Germfask, and he was a tremendous help to me, giving me background information that I will give to you a little bit later. First of all, Germfask is located in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, approximately 65 miles west of the Mackinac Bridge. You go up 77, 12 miles, and you will come to Germfask. If you go another 3 miles, you'll come to the Seney National Wildlife Refuge headquarters. The refuge, Germfask, is a peninsula surrounded by the Seney Refuge. And it has a funny name, Germfask. Originally, it was called the dump because logs were dumped on the bank of the Manistee River. And then eventually some citizens got together in 1882 and decided they had to have a name for the town. So they took the first initial of each of the original settlers' surnames. So Grant, Robinson, Meade, French, Ackley, Shepherd, and Nags, that's spelled with a K, K-N-A-G-S. So how did these men get to Germfask? I'm going to share my screen here, hopefully. Let's see if this works. Okay. Germfask was a site here. No, that's not it, I guess. Well, anyway, Germfask was the only camp of its kind in the United States. It housed approximately 100 men, and they were selected by Selective Service to be sent there to be studied. The men did not know it. They were trying to do some psychological evaluations on them. So this is my book, and I called it World War II Conscientious Objectors, the Germfask Camp, Alcatraz Camp. And I called it the Alcatraz Camp because Alcatraz, the prison, is depicted in movies as this horrible place, which it was very strict, but it was where the federal government sent prisoners who they could not control in regular federal prisons or who could have undue influence over other men and cause trouble. And so that's why I called it the Alcatraz Camp. And also this is a watercolor, this is symbolic. The hands are the conscientious objectors desperately grasping the bars. There, it wasn't a prison, but this is symbolic. And the flag is in the shadows because they're not really represented by our government. And to get to freedom and light, they have to go through the deep snow and through a forest. So anyway, How did these men get here? And by the way, if there's any questions, just, stop me and I can answer them for you. In 1939, as Germany began aggressively marching across Europe, the United States was debating isolationism and intervention. At the same time, the Mennonites, the Quakers, and the Brethren, the three churches, lobbied Congress to exclude their members entirely from serving in the military. They're known as the peace churches because they've always actively encouraged their members not to participate in war. And President Roosevelt reluctantly signed the Selective Service and Training Act of September 1940, and it was the first time Congress fully recognized and made allowances for conscientious objectors. The bill included a 4E classification to any man who, by reason of religious training and belief, is conscientious opposed to participation in war in any form. And in lieu of such induction, they were to be assigned to work of national importance. But what would they do with these men? When the bill was signed, nothing had been determined. Neither Congress nor the churches had made plans. Well, fortunately, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCCs, had been organized in 1933 during the Great Depression to decrease unemployment and promote worthwhile programs. Now, with all the eligible young men being drafted, they needed workers. And so the governmental agency that had sponsored the CCCs agreed with the peace churches that they would put these COs, our conscientious objectors, to work. And the program would be called Civilian Public Service. And in order to be eligible to serve in civilian public service.
Hey, Jane?
Yes.
Is there a way you could make your slides more larger?
Oh, let's see.
Like do it on.
Oh my. Okay, let's see. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and this is the book that I was going to get to in a few minutes. Oh, okay, I'll hit this enlargement down here. Thank you. I'll try. If it doesn't work, let me know.
Okay, let's actually make it more of a slideshow instead of.
Okay. But before a man could go into civilian public service, they had to agree to pay the government $35 a month for every man, supply all their own food and clothing, medical necessities, anything that the government wanted. And this is a research book that Bruce Henrich, the Mennonite minister in Germfask, gave me. In it, it lists all the camps. There were 151 civilian public service camps spread throughout the United States. And Germfask was number 135. It was under the Fish and Wildlife, and it's a selective service camp. These other camps, like the Mennonite Central Committee, American Friends, and so forth. So Bruce lent me his book, and in it was listed all the 12,000 men who went into civilian public service. Now this is 1979 and 1980. And so I went. There's no computer. There was no way to get a hold of these men. So I went through alphabetically, started with the letter A of the surname, and I went through alphabetically until I found the camp where they served 135. So this was the first man that I contacted. He was a Mennonite from Defiance, from Archibald, Ohio. And so I thought, how am I going to find him? So in those days, you could call an operator and actually speak with an operator. So I called Archbald, Ohio, and I dialed 1 area code 555-1212. And then I would ask, I'm looking for a Vincent Beck. Well, lo and behold, there wasn't a Vincent Beck, but there was a Vincent Beck insurance agency. And I called that number and got a hold of Vincent Beck. And this is Vincent. He gave me a lot. We had a lot of correspondence. He said that the directory had made a mistake. He was not in Germfask, but he was in other selective service camps, another selective service camp. This is Germfask when the the men were there, and another one here. Okay, now the number of men who served in the armed forces were 16 million. 20,000 volunteered for non-combatant duty. That would be your medics. And here we have the number of COs. And then 6,000 men went to war. They refused to fight at all. So what Vincent Beck had to tell me is that he was in Lapine, Oregon, and these camps were sponsored by the churches, all of them originally. But at Lapine, Oregon, there were a group of men who were extremely intelligent, refused to cooperate with the system, and said it was slave labor, and they were in concentration camps. So anyway, Vincent Beck said that the first day he was on the work crew, there was a young man, his name was Danny Dingman, and the foreman told him to cut the branches, lower branches off a tree so that the men could come in and saw it down. And he left him. A short time later, he came back, and there's Danny all the way up to the top of the tree, and all the branches are off the tree. And it was his way of protesting. He said to the foreman, "I'm a slave. I don't know what to do. You told me to cut the branches. Now I don't know how to get down." And that was just an example of some of the things that the men did. So Vincent said that the Selective Service then opened up camps for this small group of men who refused to participate in the work programs. And they opened up their own camps, and they segregated these men into these camps. There were 2 of them before Germfask, but I'm going to play something here. The men would make up protest songs, and after Danny's rebellion, the camp administration posted a list of men that they were going to send to Germfask. And these were the troublemakers. And this is the song that I hope you can hear this. It's non-professional, but it's the song. Let's see. EHIGAN, we all know this will be the end. One-way passage to Germfask, the coast door spot for the bad boy class. We don't believe that slavery is right. We fight it in our own way with might. So off to Michigan are we, and onward to liberty. Anyway, that was one of the songs that they made up, and there's a list of those in the book. And these are the men that were all sent to Germfask. Danny Dingman is not in here. Here's another group of them. Johnny Kaloff, there's a song about him. I had contact with most of these men. This is Leonard Lewis. Leonard Lewis was in Lapine, and he ended up in Germfask, and his story was quite interesting. He's another one I called St. Louis, Missouri, because that's where he originally was when he was drafted. So when I called the operator, I said, I'm looking for a Leonard Lewis in St. Louis. And she said, well, his number's unlisted, but we do have his business address. So she gave me his business address and I contacted him and we had a wonderful conversation, and his interviews are also in the book. This is the camp that the men were sent to, typical CCC camp, conservation camp. Now, as the men were sent to Germfask, the Senior Wildlife Refuge personnel were expecting a group of men that were going to carry on the work. It wasn't until the night before the first COs arrived that the Selective Service came in and informed the men, informed the excuse me, informed the workers that this was their job was to keep detailed notes on the men and all their activities so they could prosecute and imprison them. And the employees were unprepared for the task and that they were about to undertake. Employee turnover was high. One man worked only one half of a day. This is Mr. Nelson. I have an interview with him. It's in the book. This man, I called, he was at the University of Chicago when he was inducted. So I called the University of Chicago and told them I wanted the number for a Robert Cordell, and they gave it to me. So I called him and I said, I'm from Germfask, Michigan, and I'm a student working on a graduate program and I'm trying to find out about a conscientious objectors camp that was in Germfask. He said, the line went dead, just totally dead. And I thought, oh boy, he's going to hang up on me. And pretty soon he said, yes, he said, I was in Germfask. That was me. And so anyway, I told him he was a geologist, and I told him about this scene in our farm field. And he said, well, that was me. I was out collecting stones. And he said, I carried those with me for years. I just disposed of them not too long ago. And so here I had met a man that had scared us years ago and finally found out who he was. He was I'll tell more about him later. So the men in Germfask, he's one of them. He was rather quiet. He volunteered for the Salk Medical Experiment Program at the University of Michigan. This is Corbett Bishop. Let's see if I can get all my information on Corbett Bishop. Was the most, let's see if I can get this here. I don't want to, here we go. Corbett Bishop was the most publicized of all the COs and a devoted follower of Gandhi. His hunger strikes and his passive resistance techniques made national headlines with Life magazine's article and photographs of him being carried off into federal court on a stretcher because he was too weak to walk. He was a veteran of World War I. After the war, he enrolled in the University of Wisconsin, where he was a graduate student in chemistry. Prior to being inducted into CPS, he left the university and moved to New York and opened a bookstore. While in CPS, he wore robes like the prophets and let his beard grow. He practiced nonviolent protest techniques, and he went on a 30-day hunger strike in Germfask. Later, he walked out of camp knowing he would be arrested, and it is estimated that he fasted a total of 426 days while in various federal prisons, not including Germfask. One of his fasts was in sympathy with Gandhi. In sympathy with Gandhi lasted 21 days. He sent pledges to world leaders including the King of England, Joseph Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, and a host of other dignitaries. Ironically, after the war, he was released and opened a bookstore in California, and he was shot and killed in his store during a robbery. This is another man who made headlines. His name is Don DeVault. Here he is in his homemade laboratory in Germfask, and he brought national attention to Germfask when the Washington Post carried an article about him about the pangs of conscience. He wanted to do biochemical research, and the Selective Service did not want him to. So he, anyway, he set up his own lab in Germfask along with another chemist. And eventually, because he refused to work, they sent him off to federal prison. He asked prior to being sent away, he said, I will do research anywhere, with no money, just give me a place to work. And General Hershey replied to him, I would allow you to be a human guinea pig in a human guinea pig research project if an opening should occur. So anyway, he went on to federal prison. This is a Japanese American. He was in Cascade Locks, Oregon, in a CO camp. And when then the Selective Service decided they were going to send him to a internment camp, and so all the COs got together and wrote letters of protest. And he was eventually sent to Germfask, and he and Ike Bjorn, another man whose letters are in my book, walked out of Germfask in protest, knowing they would be sent to prison. This is Al Partridge. Can you see that okay? This is Al Partridge. I'll tell you a little bit more about him later on. George Reeves, and this is Johnny Kaloff. These men all got together in California later. They stuck together. Here's some of the men at Germfask. This is Leonard Lewis. This is Bastel Moore. And here's one of the two Black men that were in prison, or in Germfask. This is the conventional dorm. There were approximately 100 men in Germfask total, and only about 30% of them caused trouble or protested. This is a more conventional dorm. This is Tobacco Road, and here's Danny Dingman. They refused to follow orders or to keep the place clean. And here they are. They have a still. They cook their own food. They were as mischievous as they could be. So what are some of the things they did? Well, they did passive resistance techniques and slowdowns. For example, it might take all day for one man to sweep out a truck. They knew the laws, and so Selective Service laws, there were a lot of attorneys there. And so they kept the courts inundated with all kinds of legal activity to the point where it was nobody wanted them around anymore. But now the local people were very upset with them. They despised these men. The Mennonite minister, Reverend Osborne, who was supposed to be their religious advisor, gossip started that he invited them there, which he did not. And the people were so angry that they threatened to tar and feather him, and he had to leave town. There were threats to burn down the church And the Germfask church and another local Mennonite church were vandalized. Um, the men were taken out on occasion in the back of a pickup truck. And one night they took them to Newberry, where they were, there was a gang of them, 100 people, a mob of approximately 100 people attacked them, and they barely escaped with their lives. So they were not very well liked. They were banned from all the cities and towns nearby. This is Max McCauley. His father was a work foreman, and he lived across the street from the CO camp. And he used to ride his bike there and play. Evidently, he said they were really good to him. His bike broke, and they fixed it up for him. And he said one day a cow strayed into camp, and one of the COs put a rope around its neck and let it into the dorm. And there a cow pie flew. It landed on the floor, and instead of cleaning it up, they just put a sign on a stick that said detour. And this is Max McCauley here as an adult. But one of the things that surprised me was that when we interviewed him again later on, he still didn't know that these men were conscientious objectors. He thought they were in some sort of a honor prison. And his dad was the man who was a supervisor. And I asked him about holding a gun to the men, and he said, no, that never happened. So that was a rumor. And I also discovered later that most of this was based upon rumor. The men were very, they were passive. There was no violence whatsoever. There were never any guns in camp. They just were protesting, and they were an irritant. This made national headlines. I talked to Mr. Nelson, who was in charge of the camp, and he said the newspapers lied. There was no revolt in Germfask. So he did not know how that story got into the papers, but then it spread to several other papers, and it made national headlines and sometimes international headlines. But what happened was the men refused, the 30 men or so that were the most avid protesters, they refused to clean the kitchen. They would just go into the kitchen and eat whenever they wanted. But there was no revolt. So if you're going through Germfast today, you're going to see this sign. The sign is not correct. The COs left in 1945. The CCC men left in 1941, 42. There's nothing there to indicate that this camp was in Germfask. Today, it's the site of the Big Cedar Campground. And if you can go there and drive through, and you will see remnants of, this is all that's left of the camp, the sidewalks. Ironically, after the war, they moved all the buildings out. One family in Germfask moved it and turned it into their family home. But the other two, ironically, were moved to Manistee. And so this VFW hall in Manistee is actually two of the dorms put together. And I don't think that too many people knew about that. If you were to take the paneling off the inside walls, you would see the carvings of some of the COs. I thought that was rather ironic. Okay, so I found out who these men were, but there was one thing that I always wanted to do. I wasn't happy. I wanted to meet Danny Dingman. I had tried for years. I would call the area code and ask, was there a Dingman there? Finally, in 1990, with the aid of a computer, I found Danny Damon. He was alive and well and living in Tampa, Florida. So as soon as I called him, I said, would you have been in Germfask? He said, that would be me. And I said, Danny, I've been looking for you for 20 years. And so anyway, I decided to fly down to Tampa and I met him. And then I contacted National Public Radio, and this is Mark Rosenbaum. He was he was with Public Radio. And so he flew down with me, and I got to visit with Danny and Mark. And then also, this is another CO that lived in Tampa. He and Danny kept close contact. And anyway, there was another one there, Richard Lazarus. And so the three of them, they were like a band of brothers, only they were COs. Then Mark Rosenbaum came back to Germfast. He wanted to meet some of the people in the area to interview. And this is Omer Dorn. And Omer, in his interview, he said that as young boys, he said they would throw rocks or snowballs at the men, along with verbal insults that he didn't want to repeat here. But of course, he said the men would never respond to it. They would just walk down the street. They would put their hood over their coat and keep walking. And he said if someone needed help there, he said they would if they needed some work done on a farm or some mechanical work done, they would get them in, but then get some of the COs to help them. But then again, they were abusive towards them. So this is one of the programs that the COs could go into besides besides working as former CCCs. They did a lot of volunteer work for medical experiment, and this is the Keys medical experiment from KEYS experiment. And this was in Minnesota. It was a starvation project trying to determine how they could improve people. Once people had starved, how could they bring them back to be healthy? The forest fire jumpers came into existence at this time with the original forest fire jumpers being CO men. The men also worked on farms because of the shortage of labor. Many of them worked in mental institutions, and they did a host of other things that did help the country. And I guess because of my interest in determining how could someone object to World War II, and so I became a member of the Selective Service Board. I was on the board for 20 years, where we would interview people that might want to be considered a conscientious objectors. We would have mock trials. And so I thought maybe the government, would be down upon these people. But in fact, we were informed that we were to respect their wishes if they met the criteria for conscientious objectors, that they were to be granted that status. There were a couple of men after, let's see, I'm going to go back here to, this man is Al Partridge. His wife's interview is in the book. Al was a professor at the University of Chicago, at Michigan State. He worked in language and communications, and he and some other COs started the first public radio station in California, the first one ever. It was in Berkeley. And when the segment of NPR aired, I received a call from Al Partridge's family. They'd heard about this camp, and anyway, they wanted to get in touch with me. And I am still in touch with his son. And he was surprised because he didn't know a lot of what his father had done, and it gave him a new light into his life. But overall, it was a fascinating story, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to, to discover it and preserve that history. Any questions?
Were the prison terms long?
The prison terms, yes, some of them were. At least through the duration of the war and beyond, it depended. Towards the end of the war, a lot of the men were released. But if you read the book, there's some information in there. But one of the reasons that the church has fought so hard for their members not to go into the armed forces is that prior to this, they would either have to go to prison or they would be forced into the armed forces. And they would be in prisons. Some of them died. They were water hosed. They were left naked on cold floors. They were pushed into starvation status. So many of them did die in prison. And those that went into the armed forces, there was an example of 2 Mennonite men that were out west on a compound there, an army base, and they worked in the kitchen. And because they were Mennonites, they did not wear the uniform. So they were harassed during the day. But then at night, they were tortured. As soon as the lights went out, they would keep them awake. And then as soon as they would fall asleep, they'd wake them up again. Then they decided to have them run around the barracks at night, around the compound, which they did until they were so exhausted they would fall down. And then it turned deadly. They decided to have some fun. They made them run around the compound, and they were chased by a man on a motorcycle. And one of them was killed. And the cause of death was listed as accidental, and they shipped the body home. So conscientious objectors during World War II was a totally different world then. It's not like today.
So I understand many of them were Mennonites, but you had a picture of some of the men with a still. So would a still be with alcohol?
Yes, and that's one. Okay.
I don't know much about Mennonites, but they don't imbibe, do they?
No, not usually. These men, in fact, the one, Danny Dingman at the still here, he didn't drink at all. But there were men there. The majority of the men in the CO camps were Mennonites. There were Jehovah's Witnesses and Quakers also. And the one common denominator the men had in Germfask was their objection to conscription, their objection to war. And so they did everything they could to irritate everybody the best they could. In fact, when I talked to Danny Dingman, he didn't drink at all. He had one drink when he was in camp, but basically they weren't drinkers, and there was no fighting amongst them.
So in the camp, they were lethargic and doing their tasks, if at all, really slowly. But when you said they went out sometimes to help on the farms,
yes,
then they were more enthusiastic in working because
they felt they were doing something to help people. There was a man shortage at that time. But in camp, what Dr. Cordell, the man who I found in my yard, he said they would cut off trees in the winter, and then they would go back in the spring and cut off the stump. It was make work. They did not really have a project set up for them. The administration's main goal was to keep notes and try to send them into jail.
Wow. Okay, thank you. It's interesting. Were they surprised when they were called by you?
Oh my goodness, yes. Oh, I'm glad you asked that because um, they did not talk about it. Danny Dingman was the only one that talked about it to everybody. In fact, he started a Veterans for Peace organization in Florida at the university. But the rest of them, when I called Dr. Cordell, he never talked about it.
Mhm.
It was a horrible experience for them to take that stand. And so I hit them at the right time. It was 20 years after, approximately after. And so these people who had not talked about it opened up to me.
Mhm.
Um, and the Reverend, the minister Osborne, when I called him, the man who was forced out of Germfask, he said, I've been meaning to write about it for a long time, he said, but he said, I guess this is the time to do it. So he sent me all kinds of letters and information. It's kind of like, and I don't, uh, as Danny Dingman said, I don't begrudge the men that did fight. I respect them, but I could not do it. I do not want to demean what they did. Um, but so it was hard for these men. They couldn't find work when they got out. Danny Dingman, one of them, Nick Migliario, said he would just say he served. But Danny Dingman went to California and he wanted to work for Disney. And so he went to their main offices and he said he wanted to work for them. He was a building contractor, and the guy said, well, I think we can hire you. And Danny said, I'm a conscientious objector. I was a conscientious objector. And he said, I didn't ask that. I asked, can you do the work? And he said, yes, I can. So they sent him to Florida. And this was prior to the time that Disney was being built there. And so I'm going to see if I can find it, exactly what he said. Anyway, he went there and he was the man that was just responsible for buying up all the land in Florida on the sly. And then he did all the cost estimating for Disney. And so if you walk through Disneyland is it Disneyland? Disney World in Tampa, you will see his name on an awning there.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, it was hard for them to talk about it. And like I say, I just hit them at the right time and they were in the right mood. So they opened up to me. If I would have waited, they would have probably all been dead. It would have been too late. And before that, their emotions wouldn't let them do that. Oh, back to Dr. Cordell again. I got a call in about 2000. I'd have to check my notes. My husband and I came home, and there was a call, a message on my phone before cell phones, and he said, my name is Roy Cordell. He said, my father passed away, and we found a letter written to you in the top drawer of his desk where we could find it easily. And he wanted to know if I had gotten it. And I said, yes, I did. He sent me the letter and he said, we were so surprised. We had no idea that my father was a conscientious objector. He had never discussed it with the family.
Interesting. Yeah. Different. Maybe he didn't know what his family's emotions would be if they found that out, because it's viewed so differently today.
Right. It's a different world today. And we still have a selective service board, but of course we don't have mandatory service, so it's all volunteer. So, but the service board is in existence, the Selective Service Board, in case of any national emergency, they are ready to go. I think they'd have a hard time though.
And that's till age 26, right?
I've been off the board for a while, but I think so. But if there's a war, they can extend that.
Mm.
If there's an emergency, they can extend it. They can do what they want with it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
We had a question about whether our libraries carry your book. I don't think so, but I'll make sure that we'll get a copy.
Okay, good. That would be appreciated. Yeah, I skipped through a lot of things. I could have gone into more detail, but if you read the book, I don't want to spoil everything for you. You'll get a rounded picture of everything. And I think the book gives a well-rounded viewpoint from the church's standpoint, the CO's standpoint, the government, the local people, and the local church, and the administration at the Seney National Wildlife Refuge. So you get to hear a little bit of all their opinions.
It was very interesting. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It was a fun project.
Any other questions for Jane? Well, thank you, Jane, for a wonderful talk.
Okay, I hope it was satisfactory. I had fun. Like I say, I have so much knowledge and information. I don't want to just keep splurting facts out. So if you read the book, you'll understand a lot better.
We also have another question. Are there any books you would recommend?
Any books that I would recommend for?
Probably on this subject.
Oh my, there's quite a few. If you go on the internet now, you can find quite a few. I have bibliography in the back of my book. There's some, but there wasn't a lot of information when I started. There was not a lot of books written, but since then there have been some. If you look up conscientious objectors, World War II, you'll find quite a few. I had to ended up going to the University of Michigan to find a book there that was put out by Selective Service in 1956. That's where I got some of my factual information, and the rest is from the Mennonite Central Committee with this here civilian public service. It gives the names of all the men, and then also there's a site now, Germfask CO's conscientious objectors. It's from Swarthmore College, I believe.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you again, Jane.
Well, thank you.
And,
maybe someday you'll drive through Germfask.
Yeah, I'm interested now. I guess we could stop recording.